Kangarooian.
If you enjoy the stories on this podcast, you'll also like the stories in my book, Filmmaking Confidential, which isn't just for filmmakers, but also all artists and really any entrepreneur. Thank you for supporting the show and sharing it with your friends. Now here's today's show. I'm Steve Balderson, and you're listening to the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. In this podcast, we meet with filmmakers, writers, actors, artists, and other notables. Today's guest is filmmaker, journalist, Clara Ritger. As a freelance filmmaker and producer based in New York, she works across mediums in digital, TV, and film, and has worked with NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and PBS. Her curiosity about the world has led her to tell stories across industries, including finance, health, food, travel, fashion, and the environment. She partners with media companies, brands, and nonprofits to create emotional, shareable stories.
Me too. I'm really particular about lighting. Like, to the point where even in restaurants, there was this one restaurant that I was at, and there was just something about the way that they had put the candles on the table that was bothering me. And I figured out that if you elevated it, you could actually read the menus and just be like, it wasn't bothering my eyes so much anymore. And they were not happy because it's not safe to have all of a sudden this thing elevated. But I got them to agree with me that indeed I had improved their lighting, and maybe they would consider putting their candles on a little heightened thing.
If you have the candle higher, there's more light that falls on the surface also, right?
Right.
And I hate overhead lighting. And by that, I mean any light coming down at you from above your eye level.
Yep.
So if it's a lamp, but it's lower and the shade is protecting your eyes, but the light's going downward, that's okay. But if it's above your head, and there's a bright light somewhere above you coming down, I hate that.
I'm not funny.
I think the most idyllic lighting, especially in restaurants, is just very, very soft, muted. I can even do a harsh
halogen.
Yes. Halogen bulbs in spot are okay with me as long as they're up in a can so that you can't see the light, but that the spot it produces is very, very small.
Okay.
Lighting is important.
Lighting is very important.
And it's one of those things also, we're going to talk all out of order because this is not where I wanted to start, but we might as well just be here.
This is where we started.
This is where we started. Lighting doesn't cost money per se. It's an aesthetic understanding of light, right? So you could shoot something. I mean, do you, when you're working, a lot of the time it's natural light, correct?
When I'm doing documentary work, yeah. Like solo, if I don't have money for a crew, then built lighting is the first thing to go.
But when you have built lighting, how do you treat it?
Well, if I am working with a crew, typically that's, I'm doing corporate video stuff or, who knows, whatever. I have more of a crew. We're setting it up for interviews more than anything else. Even I would say in documentary stuff, a lot of times you want to work with just what you have, unless you just need to raise the ambient light for some reason in the room because of the room that you're in is too dark, then we'll go with that. But the cameras get a lot of the cameras I'm working with are so good in low light that a lot of times I like to just work with the light that I have, the space that I have.
Even when there is money for lighting, I would rather move somebody into the light than try to build the light around.
Yeah. I always, the thing that always bothers me too is when you see practicals that aren't being used. It just bothers me in some way. I don't know why, because I feel like I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, if that light isn't on, where is it coming from? It distorts, it makes it then this is film, as opposed to we are just spending some time with this person and you kind of forget that you're watching a film.
Do you have trouble letting go and being entertained by something, or are you constantly have a critical eye out?
Great question. I think on the documentary side of things, because I know how it all gets made, I'm constantly like sort of picking apart the recipe. Like, how did this come together? How did they do this? I'm asking like a lot of those sorts of questions. So I think I find it a lot harder to lose myself in documentary than I do in scripted. But I definitely working in film is hard because you definitely watch things and you just notice things more. And I will say that one of my favorite art forms is dance, in part because they're communicating a story with like a language that I just don't speak.
Oh, that's a really good way to think about it. And that's probably why I like doing the things I like doing, because I know nothing about that. I love watching food shows. I love watching anything about food because while I can cook some things, maybe 3 or 4 things, I love eating. And so like watching, just the colors and the textures and ingredients come together, that's really relaxing to me. And I don't care how it's filmed, really. I mean, Chef's Table is photographed and so beautiful, right? But then I don't even mind watching something that's overlit, like, Ina Garten or Guy Fieri or any of those other ones, because it's still just about the food, which is so beautiful. I mean, I love the emotional content of Chef's Table, because it's like that we're following these stories and it's like you start weeping with joy for these people who are making this thing, right? But it's also just really fun to watch. Although I would love to, at some point, do something like that, which I didn't realize you have done until today, some of these things. So tell me about the web series that you did, The Great American Cooking Show.
Yeah. So this is so funny. I obviously followed Chef's Table when it first came out because I had done something like it before it came out, and was very into. I'm very into storytelling that is character centric, where we really get to know a person and you're following them on a journey. And that's like my favorite thing about that show is I think that they do a really beautiful job of like telling these people's stories, and giving us sort of an insight into like who they are as humans and artists and mothers and fathers. And anyway, so I worked I guess rewind. You're right. The inception really was The Great American Cooking Story. So, I mean, I was working for a production company in the DC area. I wasn't really being taken seriously. And there was a lot I wanted to learn in the documentary space. I had just come out of a job as a journalist. I was covering the rollout of the Affordable Care Act on Capitol Hill, chasing down senators for comments. Realized it wasn't the kind of stories I wanted to be telling. It's a lot of, if you think about it, it's basically celebrity news. It's like who said what about what bill, or who's voting what on what. Like it's like gossip basically. And it wasn't fulfilling. I wanted to get back to telling stories about real people, and just documenting humanity. And so I started working with this production company and was trying to sort of learn how to be a filmmaker. I didn't know almost anything about how to do film. I had some very basic like shooting skills and some very basic like Final Cut Pro editing skills, but I really had to learn everything. And so I thought, well, if I can't learn it in this job, then I guess I'm going to learn it on my own. And so I crowdfunded my way on board a train trip across the country to shoot a documentary series about the role of restaurants in gentrification. Because when you think about like neighborhoods where like the hot new restaurants pop up, like in any city, it's often in neighborhoods that like are up and coming neighborhoods. It's like first come the restaurants, then come the high rises. And like, then it's gentrification, right? Because you have to create a reason for people to be in that neighborhood to justify then all these big buildings going up. And it was something that had been on my mind because when I was traveling around to different cities that my friends lived in the first couple of years out of college, I was in Cincinnati and we went to this restaurant called Hangover Easy, which is like a really great like little brunch place. But it's like, it was not in a good quote unquote neighborhood, but it had a line of like white people around the block. And so it's just like that weird, I think, disconnect for me of, I think restaurants, to experiment and to start a new restaurant, you know, as a chef, often you're not necessarily someone with a lot of money. So you need to open up your new restaurant, your new concept, and try this new thing in a neighborhood like this. And then who's working in the kitchen, who's serving your tables? It's the people in that neighborhood for the most part. And then who are the patrons, the people who are not in that neighborhood. And then all of a sudden over time, you get enough of these things that draw enough of a crowd that transforms that neighborhood to no longer being a neighborhood for the people who built it. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to the chefs behind these restaurants as they're sort of, as these neighborhoods are in different sort of stages of gentrification, about this problem and what they think about it. And there was like a ton of research actually that to like back up this like sort of theory that I had. And all these chefs had these fascinating takes on their role in gentrification. And so it was kind of like a 10 to 15 minute documentary series, one episode in a different city, in a different neighborhood. Each neighborhood was kind of in a different stage in the gentrification process. Snapshot of like what that is like in America.
It's so cool.
Thanks. I had dreams when I made it to make it into something bigger. I had really sort of positioned. It's so funny, right? So rewind again, as I just like gone off on this tangent about like how, like about why this concept, like this was also like just an opportunity for me to like learn how to shoot and learn how to edit and like learn how to make documentaries. But as I got further in the process, it became something that I thought like, wow, this should actually be a much bigger series. And so I started positioning it and talking about it with people as like, oh, this is just like a pilot series. I really want like that Netflix deal to make like a bigger, you know, show out of it. I haven't made anything else out of it since then, but yeah, I definitely still remain really passionate about the idea. And I got to meet some really interesting folks who I know would love to be part of like it, if it ever were to be something bigger.
Cool. You did that, and then you did something else, which was sort of kind of like Chef's Table.
Correct. So basically coming out of them making that series, I ended up getting hired by Chef's Feed, which has been since bought by Tastemade, which is like a food YouTube channel basically. But I think they have like, they're on Roku, or they have, I don't know, TV channel or something now. But Chef's Feed was sort of an app that was trying to be Yelp, but the only people who could write the reviews were chefs. So like if you were in a city, you'd go on that app and you'd be like, what restaurants do chefs recommend? Like, where do chefs want to eat? That's where I want to go. Like a more authentic, like dining experience. And so they were creating a ton of documentary style video content about chefs. And so I was hired by them to run their East Coast operations because they were based in San Francisco. So I ended up working with them for a little bit, and we were making, that at that point, Chef's Table had come out. So it was kind of like, that was like right in the middle. And they were basically just doing like Chef's Table, but more bite-sized content for digital.
It was really beautiful.
So I worked with them. Yeah.
When you worked on that, how many people helped you? Or was it literally one woman band?
So Great American Cooking Story was just me. And the stuff that I did with Chef's Feed, the company that I was working for, that was typically like 5-person crews, I want to say. So we would typically do like director, producer type, DP, second cam op, sound, and a PA, basically.
Cool. And did you go around as a producer of some of these and pick the chefs that you wanted to visit with, or were they sort of already picked for you?
For Chef's Feed or for Great American Cooking Story?
Chef's Feed. Well, both.
For chefs, both. Yeah. Well, Great American Cooking Story was all just me. So I did all this research and I was like cold calling like chefs and like telling them, this is my idea. Do you want to be part of this? And they were like, yeah. So that was all me. But Chef's Feed, they had somebody who was like the head of chef relations on the team. And so we would work with her to sort of like identify people who would be like a good person for a concept that we were working with. A lot of the stuff I was doing with them was branded content. So like Crocs was like a series that I did, like sponsored a series that I did. And so we were looking for people who like wanted to wear Crocs or like wearing Crocs in the kitchen, which apparently a lot of chefs do. And then just people with like interesting, like day-to-day lives that we could show wearing Crocs. So like, yeah, we kind of had like a casting person essentially that we worked with.
Cool. I saw one of those episodes. I think it was like Indian food, but it was like sort of newer.
Preeti.
Yeah.
Her last name is Preeti Mystery, I think. She's in the San Francisco area. Yeah, she's doing like millennial Indian cooking, I think is how she described it, something like that. I may have just butchered that. It's been years since I thought about that, but yeah.
What I liked about it though was that it did have that let's get to know the person. Like I felt like her energy was coming out, and in a way that Chef's Table does. Like I felt like there was something more intimate about watching her experience cooking and preparing these dishes that is missing from a lot of those kinds of shows.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really tell stories like in any different way, if that makes sense. Like, I think that's definitely a hallmark of the story of my storytelling. I just sit down and I get to know you. And like, this is a story about you. Like, I'm trying to essentially learn who you are and what interesting stories you have to tell and figure out how to like communicate it to an audience in like 5 or 10 minutes.
Do you think that comes from your background in journalism, or have you always been that curious?
I think I've always been that curious. When I was a kid, my parents have told me that when I was a kid, they would take me like hiking because I grew up in California, and I would run ahead of them on the trail to like meet people and like start asking them questions. And then they'd keep walking because they were like walking in the other direction. And I'd be like really upset that they were leaving me. So I think it's probably just who I am. I think I've always just been really, really curious about the world.
All sorts? Does everything make you curious, or is there something more than others that really drives your curiosity?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know. I mean, I think I love learning. I loved school. So there's something about the act of learning something or discovering something or understanding something that really just tickles me. I think you kind of go through phases. I think I was in kind of a phase, where I'm like, oh, I'm really interested in people. Right now I'm going through maybe a phase where I'm really interested in nature and then in history. Like I used to hate history at one point, which is ironic because it's like history is just people. But maybe I hated it because I hated the perspective it was being told from. But I don't know.
When you're curious about something and then you go and you're learning it, do you reach a point at which you have a contentment with that, or do you continue to dive deeper into that subject, so deep, so meta, so like into it that you're never done with learning about it?
That's a great question. I think I am probably pretty decent at putting things down. I think if I'm learning something for a utility purpose, there's a point to where I reach the point of like, okay, I can now use this. And so I've learned and I'm going to put it down and move on. I think I also am so curious about so many things that I think I probably just reach a point where I've like moved on to the next thing. Not to say that I like don't finish what I start, because I do. That is like one thing about me that like I finish everything I start. But yeah, I'm a little bit of an internet rabbit hole person, but not to a debilitating extent.
Filmmaker Clara Ritger. Another great guest is Amanda Dibert.
The ISIS attacks that happened in Paris, and President Hollande was supposed to be coming from the soccer match that he was at when they struck to our set. We're also at the base of the Eiffel Tower. We have people from the Obama administration with us. We have the mayors of Paris, and we have former Vice President Gore. We have dignitaries, we have celebrities, and we're like concerned that we might be a target.
You can get a link to my full interview with Amanda Dibert at filmmakingconfidential.com in our archives or by subscribing for free to this podcast. We'll be right back with Clara. Stay with us. back to our conversation with Clara Ritger.
It's so funny. So I used to be an actress. And I say used to be in a way that like, maybe I still could be in the future term, because it's so funny. Basically the reasons that I quit acting, I think have since changed. Two of, I think, my primary reasons for quitting were, one, I didn't think I had the mental fortitude for it. Done a lot of work on myself in the last 10 years. And then the other reason was the lack of stability, the like always putting yourself out there, not really knowing where your next paycheck is going to come from. Well, like, guess what? I've also been doing that for the last 5 years. So basically right before the pandemic hits, I'm like thinking I might want to get back into acting. Pandemic hits and I'm like, perfect. Me and my friends, I'm going to get my friend who's in the Iowa Writers Workshop to write me an amazing role, because he used to do that when we were in college. And then my other friend who wants to be directing stuff can help me shoot and edit my reel, basically. And we'll just make this our little pandemic hobby. Well, so then in order for the integrity of the writers group, we all had to write something. So I started writing, and then I started writing so much that I was like, oh, I could do this. This is really fun, actually. Maybe I want to do this for the rest of my life. I guess I should be a TV writer. And my friend who's in the Iowa Writers Workshop said to me, well, if that's what you want to do, well, then you have to write a pilot. And I'm like, well, how do you write a pilot? So then I just started watching everything, every show that has had some sort of accolades or something over the years. I started sampling. And I learned the hard way that you have to quit a show after the first season, because it's just never good again. Everybody has great ideas, but great ideas don't have longevity. Longevity doesn't sell the idea in the initial phase. So I'm watching all these shows and I'm dissecting, how do I write a procedural? How do I write a drama? Dissecting all these things and making all my own outlines. I have just so many documents. This was I spent so much time doing this. And then I wrote, not one, not two, but three, actually four, because I wrote a sitcom too. Yeah. I wrote different genres of pilots over the course of the pandemic. And I was like, all right, here's my portfolio. Everybody hire me. And that didn't happen. But I do feel a little bit of a mini, I gave myself my own crash course on how to be a TV writer. And I have full confidence that I could do it.
Tell me about your interests in journalism, and when did that come in relationship to visual storytelling, film, in all the endeavors that you've done?
Yeah. I mean, really the only through line in my career is that I've always been a storyteller. And I think that that's pretty central to who I was as a kid as well. I was, how people walking in on their cell phones, in the grocery store and not looking up, and they're really good at navigating the aisles. Well, I was doing that with books when I was a kid, because my mom wouldn't let me sit in the grocery cart. But I had to come in. She's like, put down the book. No. Anyway, so I've always been obsessed with storytelling, and I started acting in middle school. And then in high school, my mom was like, you need to get a job. And I didn't want a regular job. I wanted an exciting job. So I ended up getting a job as a movie reviewer for the local newspaper.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And they would give me $25 a review, which was enough for my ticket and popcorn, and to take home $10 for my work. As I was doing that, they offered me opportunities to write other stuff. So I remember that I covered graduation one year, the high school graduation or whatever. I wrote a couple stories. And so basically by the time I went to college, I had some experience in it. And so I started writing for the news magazine in college and just doing different features and investigative stuff. And it was exciting to me. I was majoring in political science and film, television, and theater, but the latter was more of an acting focus. And so then I ended up doing a minor in journalism, because I wasn't totally sure what I was going to do after college. And I spent most of my summers in college doing journalism internships. So I actually one summer went to the Pennsylvania state capitol and did this like crazy internship where you're working with all of the different reporters for all the different newspapers for the state of Pennsylvania. So you basically, as an intern, you like rotate around each bureau. So like I would do 2 weeks writing for the Pittsburgh folks, then 2 weeks writing for the Philly folks. And so your audience and like beats and like coverage is changing. And that was super exciting. And that is sort of what led me to go to DC, like that experience. I was like, this is amazing. I want to do this on a bigger scale. And then turns out it's not as amazing when you get to DC. It really, truly is just a swamp where nothing gets done.
What university were you in?
I went to Notre Dame.
How did you find it? Just the whole process of attending a university.
So, I mean, my aunt mailed them a check for my application and told me that I had to apply. And so then I applied early decision or whatever and got in. And so then I just always knew that that was like an option. I actually I auditioned for and got into the USC School of Theater. So I was very excited and really wanted to do that. And Notre Dame gave me a full ride and USC gave me a half ride. And my parents were like, no. So that's how I wound up at Notre Dame.
Did you enjoy college?
I did. I wanted to go to a big football school, hence like USC, Notre Dame. I wanted that like classic get drunk, like college experience, I guess. I just was I studied a lot in high school. I was not cool. And I think I wanted that like freedom from my parents, you know, and that the experience of going away and growing up and I got what I wanted. I think looking back, I wish I had the ability to see that maybe taking a year off and like traveling and like growing up a little bit as a person would have benefited me more. Because I think now that I'm in my 30s and I've kind of like dabbled in a couple different careers, I realize like just how many more careers are available or would have been available to me. And I wish I had maybe explored in some capacity, like maybe I would have been interested in this or could have done this or whatever. And I think I went to college for the college experience, not necessarily for the like degree. And so I think like when I graduated college, it was really tough because I remember sort of being like, well, I guess I'm falling into this career and I don't know what I really want to do with my life. And I don't really know what's going to make me happy. And so I struggled for a little bit.
Have you found that?
Yes and no. I think what I have found is a lot of personal growth and the ability to make choices now that like are maybe unconventional. I don't feel like I'm living the life that like we are sold in movies and that your parents want you to live or hope that you will live. There are like certain milestones in most people's lives, like going to college, getting married, having a kid. And like, I just am not doing a lot of those things. I mean, I went to college.
Do you want those things?
Like, I don't know. I think that I'm like about to do something pretty crazy that I know that I want. And so I'm really excited about that. And I guess we'll see like what's on the other side. But I think that that's what's been the most transformative for me, has just been to be like, you do not have to, like, life is whatever you want your life to be. Like, you do not have to do these things that like everybody else is doing. And like, also, I think what documentary has really opened my eyes to is like just how many people wake up one day and realize that they've done all these things that maybe they didn't want to do either. And it's too late, sort of, because, you know, if you realize like, oh, maybe I didn't want to have kids that young, like it's a little bit too late. Like that's kind of a responsibility. I mean, you could, but you can't just walk away from.
Right.
So I think I'm grateful in some ways for that.
Have you always had that kind of an independent spirit?
Yeah, I have, for sure. I've always been, I remember when I was in middle school, I was in youth group, and I basically like got kicked out of youth group, or like kind of got kicked out of youth. I got like a talking to, and was like asked to like think about my actions and then come back. My dad like had a whole sit down conversation with me, but basically like you know, in youth group they would talk about stories from the Bible, and I just had a lot of questions. I just had a lot of questions, and you know, they couldn't really answer my questions. And so the questions would get harder and they would keep coming. And, you know, I needed to apparently leave some breathing room for some other people in the youth group.
That's so good.
But I wasn't satisfied. Like, I wasn't trying to be like a little shit, you know? Like, and I was being that, but I wasn't really like, it came from a really good place, like a really like, I want a good answer. And I remember my dad basically being like, there aren't good answers. Like, I'm just going to tell you, there aren't good answers. You just have to choose to believe. And my dad is a chemical engineer and really like scientific, right? And I was like, well, that's not going to work for me. And I don't know how it works for you. And then I still went to Notre Dame. So
that's so good. Were you raised in a religious household?
Oh yeah. Like my parents aren't the like Bible thumping, like I think picture of like parents that are maybe portrayed in movies and TV shows. My dad was raised Catholic. My mom was raised Episcopalian. We were raised Episcopalian. And yeah, I mean, we went to church every Sunday. And I would say that the values of like church and the teachings of the Bible and like morality were really ingrained in us as kids. I don't really feel like I struggled with like the guilt thing that like a lot of Catholic kids talk about. Like that doesn't really resonate for me. Like guilt and shame, that doesn't really resonate for me, but definitely like shaped my like worldview, or I think just like how I operated until I sort of like took a step away from all of that and figured out like my own kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that, you know, ancient Christianity and Buddhism and all the other religions are all teaching the same story. You know, it's all like.
Yeah, it's so funny. I also, something I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is like maybe not going to be popular with a lot of people, is how I feel like in some ways we use religion because we're afraid of our own power. We're afraid of like, there's no explanation for why people act the way they do, like, unless they're like possessed by the devil or something. Right. Or just like, I think, I do think that like, right. Like, like I'm so fascinated by like science and energy and like the way that the universe was formed and the way that like we are moving energy. And so when my energy comes into presence with yours, like there is like a feedback that is happening, right? Like that is not like something that like I think is comfortable. Like in religion, it's like, it's much more comfortable to just be like, you are the prophet and you are the right. Like, it's an easier narrative for people to believe than to believe that like some people are more in tune with like the universe and their power. And so I think it's just a good explanation for stuff.
Well, and like I said in my book, you know, it's also the power structure's way of maintaining power is to keep that place so that it's like you aren't supposed to have your independent thought and your, you know, whatever. You're supposed to just do what we tell you. Yes, 100%.
It's interesting. I think about this too with like, so I just did this documentary on alcohol. It was for Notre Dame actually, which is like funny. Holly Whitaker wrote a book, Quit Like a Woman, which is about her journey to sobriety and essentially like how she got sober outside of the like traditional AA system and why she got sober outside of the traditional AA system. And for her, it was essentially like learning a lot about the alcohol industry and the ways in which like we are essentially manipulated into drinking the way that we do, both through like movies and TV, but also like just the messaging that we start to like ingrain within us and act the way we do. And like how we just start it basically, like I think about alcohol in societies and it's like, yeah, if you have people going to the bar every night and getting drunk, you are incapacitating them. They can't revolt, you know, they are more like they're easier to coerce. Like you can control the population this way. Right.
Yeah. Well, and then also
we want conformists. We don't want, like, society does not function if people aren't conforming.
Right. And on that same note, there's something, or it's a side note to it, which is, you know, if you grow up in France and you have some wine with lunch and a little bit with dinner every day, you don't want to go binging on the weekend because it's not part of the culture.
We talked about that too. And she talks about it, I think, in the documentary as well. It's specifically an American culture problem. The way that Americans drink alcohol and the like stories we tell around it is like specifically an American issue.
Have you filmed non-documentary fiction?
I have acted in non-documentary fiction, but I don't believe that I myself have shot it.
All right. Well, here's the thing I'm going to tell you. When it comes time for you to cast, think of it this way. Well, you read my book, so you know this chapter. Casting is like cooking. So each person, each actor has a special ingredient. And you have to like kind of be a little intuitive or like just sort of read into it a little bit or use the metaphor. It's like I have a friend who's really spicy. She's got some anger management problems, you know, whatever. So I'm going to attach the cayenne pepper to her. Right. And then there's this other person who's really, really mild mannered, who's very, very soft spoken. So I'm going to attach basil to him. Right. And then when I'm thinking about assembling a cast or crew, I'm thinking about what is their ingredient, because honestly, how do they go together actually makes sense.
This was one of my favorite parts of your book. Obviously, like, because we're all egocentric, I immediately was like, what ingredient am I? But it was really like one of the things that I thought was like very smart. I do think that you have to think about, like, when you assemble groups, you have to think about like who's going to complement each other's like skill sets, like how are, you know, you can't have like a shining star and then another shining star. Like, it was probably like a lot of the issue with like Don't Look Up. Honestly, I'm like, I think you have ingredients that like don't play nice with each other.
What ingredient do you think you are?
I don't know, actually. I didn't think too hard about it. I just wanted somebody else to tell me.
I would, now I'm going to have to like pause my mind because you've got a solid foundation. You're reliable. You're a hard worker. You've got good work ethic. What is an ingredient that has those qualities? Like, that's sort of like a go-to, all around, probably good in everything.
Am I just the whole damn meal?
Period. That's the end of the show. No, I'm kidding. As you know, because you were there, I had Davey Wavy on the podcast. And we were talking a little bit about what is considered, going back to a little bit of religion and what we're raised with and what we're told. How do you define erotica, pornography, the word explicit, the word titillate? How do you handle categorizing human sensuality and human sexuality?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting the way that, this is religion, right? The very first story in the Bible teaches you to be ashamed of your body. That's the very first thing that you're told. And I think it's just so funny how humans have gotten so far away from understanding that we are animals. Like we think like the word, like I hate the word like civilized, right? It's like words that sort of box us into something that is antithetical to our nature. I think it's so strange the way in which we are like ashamed of our bodies and specific parts, that we're like taught to hide them, that like someone shouldn't see them. It's so disgusting to me as a woman, the way in which it's like my responsibility to hide other parts so that men don't like get too excited about them. Yeah, it's just silly. And like, I think I'm really excited for the younger generations who have parents who are like my age and older, who are asking these questions and therefore like raising their kids slightly differently as a result, because I think that it's going to do wonders for people in terms of understanding of gender and sexuality and what they like. I think we'll end up coming to find that, like, I think like if you're really in tune with yourself and love, that you can really love anyone, that it won't really be like I'm hetero or I'm homo or I'm pan or whatever. Just like, I think that like eventually like we maybe won't even need labels like that anymore. And that excites me. I definitely grew up in a house where my parents were really ashamed of sex and sexuality. And that was something that I wasn't able to really connect with in my own body for a while because of them, because of the way that they treated it and handled it. And that's definitely something that I've done a complete 180 on in the last decade or so, and am pretty vocal about. I actually am on a group chat with my mom and my dad, and I think I was bitching about not being able to like find my cervix or something to them the other day. Anyway, I just started, you probably know, I was trying to find a menstrual cup. So also life-changing for any like women who are listening to this podcast, menstrual cups, really fun. I just started using one. And it's really fun to like take it out and like see all your blood. And just like, it has like a really cool consistency, anyway, but so you need to know where your cervix is to like order a specific menstrual cup. And anyway, I couldn't find it. And my parents were like, well, can you not? I'm like, oh, please.
What's next for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So something that I realized in November, actually, so you and I were working on set together, and then I was in Hawaii, and then I stayed longer and then did a little bit of traveling and thinking and hiking. I do my best thinking when I'm hiking and just like traveling by myself. It's really great. Also, like traveling by yourself is amazing because like I'm my own best companion, and I like being in my head. I like talking and thinking through things and like the discoveries that I come to. So anyway, so the big discovery I came to was that there's a lot of the world that I want to see, and I'm not ready to wait to do that anymore. I didn't study abroad in college, another like regret that I have, but it's never too late. to do the thing that you feel like you should have done. So I'm leaving. I am moving out of my apartment in New York, and I don't know when I'm coming back. And I'm really excited about it. I'm going to start in Africa. I'm going to be backpacking and hiking and just seeing like that part of the world. It's been a part of the world I've wanted to see for a long time. And then who knows where I'll go to from there. I have some ideas, but you kind of always want to leave it open to adventure. But I'm hoping that I can maybe be on the road for 2 or maybe more years, maybe a mini college. And write. I was always a writer. I've always been a writer. And yeah, I just think this is going to be a really good opportunity for me to kind of hit like reset and see the places that I want to see and just be living the life I want to live.
Filmmaker, journalist, explorer, Clara Ritger. Tune in next time for more Filmmaking Confidential. It is totally free to subscribe, and when you subscribe, you'll get upcoming new episodes automatically, and you'll have free access to all our past shows. The Filmmaking Confidential podcast is a production of Dekanga Audio and produced by myself and Ella Spencer. Our original theme music is composed by Kevin Robles. For more of the Filmmaking Confidential podcast, head over to filmmakingconfidential.com. If you have a question about filmmaking you'd like me to answer on the podcast, send me an email using the contact form on the website. To learn more of my filmmaking secrets, be sure to pick up a copy of the book, Filmmaking Confidential, available on Audible, paperback, and ebook, wherever books are sold. I'm Steve Balderson. Thanks for listening and spreading the word. Until next time, keep making, keep doing, keep going.